Hi, everyone. Welcome to this YouTube channel. My name is Levi Cosijn, and today I am speaking again with Anthony Lewis. Hi, Anthony. How are you?
Levi, good to be here.
Anthony and I are making a mini-series on horary astrology, and we've been looking at a real estate example, a career example, and a relationship example. Today, we're going to do another interesting relationship example coming from, I think, one of the books of William Lilly, correct?
By Christian Astrology, yeah.
Cool. So, right. That's a lot of examples there.
This is the one we'll be doing today. I don't know if you can see that.
Yeah. What makes it interesting, this one?
Well, you had asked to do another relationship, Horary, so this is one of his more notable ones. And what's interesting, there are many things interesting, but particularly what interested me was that he bases his interpretation on the ephemeris of the time, which gives different positions of the planet slightly. But the aspect he thinks is applying that's crucial is actually separating.
Right.
So he gives the right answer from the wrong information. What I did was I went through and tried to see if maybe using his approach, we could see a way it worked using the correct ephemeris and not what he had.
Interesting.
But it does raise interesting questions about the nature of astrology. And I think it often happens that astrologers give a good interpretation based on wrong data or the wrong chart.
Absolutely. I think that's one of the things that as astrologers, we all experience.
Yeah. So here's an example where Lilly did it. He didn't know he was doing it.
Yes.
But our modern computers and telescopes tell us that he was doing it that wrongly. Okay, so shall we start with the example? All right, so this is from Christian Astrology, page 385, chapter LIX, what is that, 59? A lady, if she will marry the gentleman desired. And there's a backstory to this. So this is a quote from Lilly. A gentleman had been a long time earnest suitor unto marriage, but she could never master her affection, so much as to incline to marriage thoughts with him. She slighted him continually, and at last, to the great discontent of the gentleman, gave him an absolute denial. So this guy was smitten with her, he pursued her, she kept brushing him off, and she finally said, "Get lost." But, I put this in, Fickle Women, this is a play from the 1920s. I tried to capture the character of this woman. So she has these men pursuing her, and she doesn't take him seriously.
Right.
I hope I'm not offending any women. But then she changed her mind. After which denial so given, so when she became passionately affectionate, so she dumped him, and then she had second thoughts and said, "Oh my God, what have I done?" She did sorely repent her folly and her churlish carriage behavior, wishing she might again have former opportunities. This was her condition at the time she propounded the question. So this guy's pursuing her for a long time. She keeps slighting him. She dumps him. And then she realizes she doesn't have a man in her life. What am I going to do? And she gets desperate, passionately affectionate, and sorely repenting. So this reminded me of the DSM, borderline personality disorder. Here, the feelings of abandonment. She dumped him, then she feels abandoned. Intense, unstable relationships. I think she meets that. Quickly attaches and then devalues. Impulsivity, self-damaging acts, inability to control her impulsivity, emotional instability, frequent drastic changes. So she goes from totally disdaining him to being passionately affectionate, etc. So she may meet the criteria, I think, anyway. So here's the chart. Now, Lilly, I think we talked about this before. He's in Protestant England, so they're not using the Gregorian calendar that we use. He's using the Julian calendar.
Yes.
So his dates are going to be about 10 days off from the modern calendar.
Right.
So he asked the question in the evening of June. She asked the question in the evening of June 16th. In the modern calendar, it's the morning of June 27th, roughly 10 days later. It's a Mercury day, so it's a Wednesday during the Saturn hour. Right, he says this, Saturn hour. The ascendant is at 17 Leo 11, right here. This is the first house cusp. And he's using Regiomontanus houses, tropical zodiac. Because Leo's rising, the sun rules the querent, and the man she's interested in, the suitor, is the seventh cusp with Aquarius, so Saturn rules the quiescent, the man she's interested in.
All right.
And if we look where Saturn is up here in the 10th house at 1453 of Taurus. And the aspect that his ephemeris got wrong was that Jupiter is at 14 Cancer, 40 in this chart. But by modern standards, modern ephemeris, it's actually after the sextile perfects, not before. So do you see that? Jupiter here is approaching a sextile to Saturn very quickly. But if you do it in a modern computer with our modern data, Jupiter has just left that sextile.
Yes.
Okay. This is the modern chart, calculated Regiomontanus houses. Let's go through this. The seventh is the quiescent, the man she's interested in. Lilly notes that Saturn is conjoined to Mars in Taurus in the 10th. So this must somehow describe the person she's interested in. I think Lilly says, we'll read it, but he's really angry with her for dumping him. That's the Mars-Saturn. Mars rules the 4th here, Scorpio, which is the 10th of the 7th. Here's the 7th, 10th from the 7th is 4. And he says, this means that there may be some person of noble character involved. And Aries is Mars also rules Aries, which in Regiomontanus is intercepted in the 9th. And the 9th is the 3rd of the 7th. So this could be a relative, a kinsperson. The 3rd in Lilly's scheme is the house of its communications, but it's also siblings and near relatives, kinsfolk. The moon, very important in any horary, rules the 12th, which is self-undoing, and it's in the 5th. Okay. And what I did, because it interests me to see what the sky looked like, so I put up the planetarium. Lilly obviously didn't use this, but if we look at this, here's the chart. It has Leo rising over here. The north node is in the 12th, right? Yeah. These blue lines, I don't know if you can see them, are the house cusps.
Yes.
This is the meridian. So the meridian where it crosses the ecliptic, this is the ecliptic, is the midheaven. That's about 1 degree of Taurus, 2 degrees of Taurus.
Yes.
Here we have Saturn, Mars, and Venus all in the 10th house, right here, this cluster. And the 10th spans from this blue line to this blue line. And then we have Mercury just inside the 11th. And Pluto, interestingly, this is an interesting astronomical point. If we just look at the ecliptic projection of Pluto, it's clearly in the 10th house, right? If we draw a vertical line from Pluto to the ecliptic, it's in the 10th house.
Yes.
But because Pluto has such a distance, it travels at such a distance from the ecliptic, the body of the planet is down here and in the 11th house. And this often happens with Pluto. It will appear to be in one house on our flat horoscope wheel. But in reality, in the sky, it's in a different house because it's so distant from the ecliptic.
Yes.
And the 11th house then has Mercury, Sun, Chiron, Jupiter. Obviously, Pluto didn't, Lilly didn't know about Chiron, but here they are, Sun, Chiron, Jupiter. Chiron also is fairly distant from the ecliptic. It's still in the 11th, but it's pretty far south. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So this is what just so we can visualize it in space, this is the Earth's equator, the red line.
Mm-hmm.
This blue line here is the horizon. This is this line here on the map.
Yes.
The horizontal line that goes across.
It's interesting to see the equator, and then Regiomontanus divides the equator into 12 equal portions, and it's a nice visual here.
Right. And where the horizon meets the ecliptic is the ascendant.
Right.
Where the meridian meets the ecliptic is the midheaven. And then Regiomontanus, he divides the equator, this into equal segments, and uses the, I think, north and south points of the horizon for his circles.
Mm-hmm.
So you can see this slice, it's like slicing, whoops, well, let me go back. Slicing an apple. This slice is the 12th house. This slice is the 11th house.
Yes.
This slice is the 10th house. This slice is the 9th house. This isn't essential to the chart, but it's nice to, I think, know what the sky looks like.
Absolutely.
So Lilly's always concerned is the chart radical? Meaning, is it a root chart? Does it really accurately describe the situation? Because then I can depend on the chart to give me an answer.
Mm-hmm.
And partly he uses the Lord of the Hour to determine that, but he almost always uses the description the chart gives of the querent, the quesidid, and other factors. So he begins by describing the querent from the ascendant, the ruler of the ascendant, where it's located, and then he describes the man she's interested in the same way from the descendant, the ruler of the descendant, where it's located.
Mm-hmm.
It's fairly lengthy, so I didn't repeat it all on the slide, but here's the gist of it.
Mm-hmm.
He physically describes the querent because she's in front of him, and he says, yeah, she fits the chart. And then he adds finding Saturn, which is the guy she's interested in, elevated and in conjunction with Mars. I judged that the gentleman was a sad, angry, and much discontented, and scorning his former slights, as ever Saturnine people do. So he says, Saturn describes the man she's interested in. He is really unhappy, and he's conjoined to Mars, so he's angry too, because she dumped him. Right. I judged him much incensed by a kinsman. This is Mars ruling Aries in the 9th, which is his 3rd, or gentleman of quality, Mars ruling Scorpio in the 4th, which is his 10th. Mm-hmm. That would be a gentleman of quality. And he says, Lord of the 3rd from the 7th. Mars is Lord of the 3rd from the 7th, and the 4th being the 10th from the 7th. This gentleman, Mars, so the guy he's with in the sky, let me go back a minute. So he's saying Saturn is here, Saturn is with Mars. Mars not only describes Saturn's anger about the situation, but probably describes a person that this guy is with. So this guy's connected with a Mars-like person. And Mars rules Aries and Scorpio. So this Mars-like person has characteristics of the nature of the 3rd from the 7th and the 10th from the 7th. Okay. And he's doing this to make sure the chart is radical.
All right.
So this gentleman, Mars, and he, the quesidid, must live together in a house because they're together in the sky, or live near one another, maybe they're neighbors, because they're both angular and fixed. So he says this to her, he says, this guy must live with another man, maybe they're roommates, so they share a house, or maybe he has a friend who's a neighbor and he's a gentleman or a kinsman. Maybe he lives with his cousin. And she says, oh yeah, that's true. And then this clues Lilly into, this is a radical chart because it's describing the situation pretty accurately.
Mm-hmm.
How else would I know he lives with his cousin or his brother or something like that? Now, Lilly says the moon has recently been void of course. It left being void of course, and it's in orb of opposing the sun. So let me go back to the chart so we see what he's talking about. So the moon is here at 27 Sag. It had recently been opposite, what had it been? Had been opposite Mercury, right?
Mm-hmm.
At 16 Gemini. But the orb of Mercury is only about 7 degrees. So once it got beyond 7 degrees from the 16, which is roughly 23, 24 degrees of Sag, it was void of course. It was not an orb of any aspect.
Mm-hmm.
And then it got to 27 of Sag, and it started getting close enough to opposing the sun to be in orb of the opposition to the sun. And so in Lilly's mind, the movement of the moon shows what came before is past aspects, what it's moving toward is future. And it's coming from an opposition to Mercury, which makes sense because Mercury rules the 11th, her hopes and wishes. So her hopes have been dashed. She changed her mind and decided she did want to marry this guy after all. And then it went through this void of course period where nothing's happening. He's not interested anymore. And it's approaching this opposition to the sun. And the sun is her ruler. So it looks like the future isn't looking very bright for her, right?
Mm-hmm.
The moon is about to oppose her own ruler. And the moon signifies the 12th, which is loss, undoing, self-sabotage. So she's going to pay the consequences. So let's read what he said. Regarding void of course, all manner of matters go hardly on when the moon is void of course, except when the significators are very strong. Yet somehow the moon performs if void and in the sign Taurus, Cancer, Sag, or Pisces. So he's saying generally a void of course moon means nothing is going to happen. But there are exceptions if the significators have a lot of dignity in the chart that can overcome the void of moon. Mm-hmm. Or if the moon is void, but it's void in the signs of Taurus, which is the home of Venus, a benefic, Cancer, the home of the moon, or Sag and Pisces, the home of Jupiter, the greater benefic. So those signs can give the moon a little boost. Mm-hmm. And also the moon is exalted in Taurus, so that gives it more of a boost. Okay. Sure. And so this moon is in Sag, so that it being void isn't totally bad. There's some hope it can function here. Mm-hmm. Being void in Sag, the moon's last aspect was the opposition of Mercury, ruler of the 11th of her hopes and wishes. Then Lilly says, quote, I said that the gentleman had no inclination or disposition unto her. So he's fed up, he's given up. Finding the moon separated from void of course and applying to opposition of the sun, lord of the ascendant, did argue that there was small hope of effecting her desire, because she herself, by her own perverseness, this is the moon ruling the 12th, had done herself so grand a mischief, whereupon she told me the truth of all, and not before, and implored my directions. So he confronts her with what he's seeing in the chart, because she's not telling him everything. And she says, yeah, that's what happened. I screwed myself. Okay. And again, this then convinces him even further that the chart is radical. Mm-hmm. Looking at the moon's aspects, we already talked about this. This just shows it in a table form. The moon had opposed Mercury. Then it had entered a period of being void, and its next aspect a couple days later will be the opposition to the sun. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
What I did was I went through step by step what Lilly said. So the moon rules the 12th house, which I call the house of shooting yourself in the foot. And it was void, of course, from its separation from Mercury. And then when it reached about 22 degrees, it stopped being void and it entered the orb of being in opposition to the sun. Lilly often used Al-Biruni's orbs, which I think in Tajika they use the same ones.
Yes.
So the sun has an orb of 15 degrees. So when a planet is within 15 degrees of the sun, or an aspect of the sun, at least the sun can affect the planet. The moon has an orb of 12 degrees. So when the moon gets within 12 degrees of the sun, that opposition starts to become effective. Lilly used moiety, so he used like the midpoint between 15 and 12, which is 13 and a half. So when the moon gets within 13 and a half degrees of the sun, Lilly would say that that opposition is starting to take hold. Okay, so Lilly finds a glimmer of hope. He says, whereupon she told me the truth of all, and not before he confronted her with the chart. She implored my directions, which way, without scandal to her honor, it might be brought on again. So she says, how can I marry this guy without scandal? And she was lamentably perplexed and full of heaviness. Whereupon, with much compassion, I began to consider what hope we had in the figure. I found the sun, the querent, applying to a sextile to Saturn, the quested. So he's looking for hope. What could bring them together? Well, the sun is moving to sextile Saturn. That's hopeful. This argued that the woman's desire, the strength of her affections toward the quested, but there's a problem. There was no reception between the sun and Saturn. And therefore that application to a sextile gave little hope. But finding reception between Jupiter and the moon, and between the sun and the moon and Jupiter's triplicity, the moon and the sun's triplicity, and the sun in, no, it's the sun and the moon in the sun's triplicity and the sun in the moon's house, meaning domicile.
Mm-hmm.
Observing also that the moon did dispose Saturn in her exaltation, and of Jupiter in her house, and that Jupiter was very near a sextile dexter, from the right-hand side of Saturn, still applying and not separated. So here's what he's saying, because that's a big mouthful. Jupiter is exalted in Cancer, which is the home of the moon, the domicile of the moon. The sun is also in Cancer, the home of the moon. So the moon does receive Jupiter and the sun and is kindly disposed toward them.
Mm-hmm.
It's their dispositor. The sun is in the home of the moon, and the moon lies in Sag, which is a fire sign, and the sun is a fire planet. So there's that connection. It rules a fiery triplicity. The moon disposes Saturn in Taurus by exaltation. Taurus is the exaltation sign of the moon. So the moon is a dispositor of Saturn by exaltation. Mm-hmm. The moon also disposes the sun and Jupiter. So the moon really is connecting these planets, Sun, Jupiter, Saturn, through its disposition. Lilly believed that Jupiter was applying to Saturn by sextile.
Yes.
But in fact, by modern calculation, they've just separated from that.
But how much, I mean, because that would play a role. I mean, if Jupiter would be at 16 degrees, for example, then technically they would be separating, but it is a very strong
well, Lilly's
sextile.
rule of thumb, he used 6 minutes of arc for separation. Once planets were separated by 6 minutes, he said they were separated. And here 36 plus 6 is 42. And Jupiter is at 1445. So they're separated by just 3 minutes of arc.
Yeah.
So Lilly would say they're separated by his own definitions.
Right. Does Jupiter have any spouse connotations in this horoscope, except for the fact that it's the man, often in a woman's horoscope, and he's also exalted, you know? I mean,
Jyotish, Jupiter would be the husband she's seeking, right? For the moon to oppose Jupiter, it has to enter Capricorn, which is the fall of Jupiter. So that's not a good opposition, because the moon will be opposing Jupiter for the sign of Jupiter's fall. And Jupiter want nothing to do with the moon.
yes, that's a good point. I think this whole receiving from the exaltation sign, before I got into our talks, haven't really used. I think it's very interesting the more I look at it.
Lilly uses it a lot, and I think it does seem to bear out in practice.
Yes.
So let's go on and see what Lilly did. Jupiter is in his exaltation, and Jupiter is a fortunate planet, ever assisting the nature and the afflicted. And Jupiter was, by his strength, able to qualify and take off the malice of Saturn. Now, he thinks Jupiter is applying to Saturn.
Yeah.
I mean, in fact, as you said, they are in sextile, even though it's separating. So this aspect is in effect. I mean, Jupiter is helping Saturn out here favorably.
Right. Yeah.
And besides, the nearness of Jupiter to the sextile made me confident that the quested was intimately acquainted with a person of quality, I mean, the man, and worth, such as Jupiter represented, whom I exactly described, and the lady knew very well. So Lilly says that this Jupiter, because it's sextile Saturn, and he thought applying, but the sextile's there, it's very close, must be some kind of noble gentleman that the quested knows. And so Lilly's advice is to go to this guy, and he describes this guy. You know, he's exalted in Cancer in the 11th, etc., conjunct the sun. And so Jupiter says, does your suitor, your ex-suitor, your ex-boyfriend, know this kind of noble guy? And she says, oh yeah, I know exactly who you're talking about. And then Lilly says, well, go talk to him, the Jupiter guy.
Right, interesting.
See if he will intervene on your behalf with your ex-boyfriend. Yeah,
that's something that I wouldn't have come up with. But to come back to this whole orb, you know, being in orb and all, the fact that Saturn and Jupiter are two very slow moving grahas, I would be very strict with the orbs. So I think it probably would depend on the context and also the speed of the planets.
Yeah.
Interesting.
And he's talking about the centers of the bodies of the planets in space as we view them being separated by 6 minutes. Then they're separated. I mean, if we want to be sticklers, we could look at the sky exactly on this date and see how wide each planet was in the sky, and then find out were the bodies really separated or not. So Jupiter, this is just to show that here's the same chart. Here they're 8 minutes apart in this chart, 45, 36. Okay. So they're definitely separated by, this is a different program that came up with 8 minutes separation. So by Lilly's definition, they're separated. So Lilly says, unto him, unto this Jupiter guy, I directed her to address her complaints and to acquaint him fully with her unhappy folly. I positively affirmed that in the gentleman described she should find all honor and secrecy, because he's exalted in Cancer. And I think the secrecy probably because he's conjunct the sun, so there's this, he's under the sunbeams, which hides things. And I doubted not, but that by God's blessing, he would again revive the business, her desire to get married, now despaired of, and bring her to her heart's content. But finding Saturn and the sun, finding that Saturn and the sun came to a sextile on the 27th of June. Now he's using the old calendar. told her to do all this by the 27th because he wants to take advantage of the sun sextile Saturn. Let's go back. So he says, this is the querent. Saturn is the ex-boyfriend. The querent's sun is 5 Cancer. The boyfriend is 14 Taurus. This sextile, the sun's going to move forward in Cancer. It's going to sextile the Saturn on the 27th. The question, oh wait, this is the modern calendar. We got to subtract 6 days, 10 days. So he says by June 27th in our old style calendar, Julian calendar, you've got to do all this. Go see the guy, get him to intervene, because you want to maximize the supplying aspect of the sun to Saturn. From her point of view, Jupiter in the 11th is a house of benefactors, people who go out of their way to help her.
Right.
And so just the very presence of this exalted Jupiter in the 11th, this may be a guy of the nature of Jupiter, so there's a noble guy, who also is quite friendly to the Saturn because of the sextile, that she can appeal to help her out. And he gives her the deadline. He says, you got to do it before the sun makes the sextile to Saturn. Because that's applying, you want, that sextile is when could signify you coming together with him. So do all this before that sextile takes place, which would be July 7th in our calendar. This might be a little busy, but I just wanted to show the aspects. This is our current calendar, Gregorian. She asked the question right after Jupiter had sextiled the Saturn. So this aspect is past. And then, interestingly, Venus opposed Uranus, not afterwards. This could be the breakup of a love affair, okay? But Lilly wants to maximize everything by this date. By the time the sun sextiles Saturn, which will be July 7th, he says, you got to get all this done. You got to get your Jupiter friend to go talk to him, see if he can patch up the relationship. Okay. The sun will sextile Saturn on July 7th by transit, and that could bring their hearts together. Can you see their hearts coming together? Okay. Lilly's ephemeris is not precise, so he erroneously says that the 19th of June, so we have to add about 10 days to that, the 29th of June. Around noon, the gentleman should first move the questioned in the business. So he even gives a date when this Jupiter guy should go see the Saturn guy. And my reason was because that day, Saturn and Jupiter were in perfect sextile. But that's false. We just saw that it wasn't the 19th of June or the 29th. It's July 7th. Lilly is off. That's already happened, right? He can't do it in the future because it happened right before she asked the question. But I wondered if, because Lilly gave this advice on June 19th, this is what you do, whether there was some other aspect that was going on that helped it work out, because it did work out. She got back together with him.
Right.
And looking at the ephemeris, I noticed, now this is not Lilly, this is me sort of trying to see if there was a way that it worked out that Lilly didn't talk about, because he didn't have the ephemeris accurately. The transiting moon perfected a trine to Venus, with Venus in Taurus, and the moon in the triplicity in term of Venus. Oh, here we go. So on June 19th, which was June 29th in our calendar, so if I put that for these dates, this is the date Lilly picked to have the Jupiter guy go talk to the Saturn guy. And on that date, we have the moon trine, trine Venus. And this occurs with Venus in Taurus and the moon in Capricorn, but it's in the triplicity in term of Venus. The moon can co-rule the querent, so that's good. It's trine from Capricorn to Venus. The moon's exaltation is favorable.
But the moon also rules the querent, right? It rules the sun. So the trine with Venus would make that happen.
The moon can rule the querent, yeah.
Yeah, so when moon trines Venus, makes sense.
So that's going to be on June. So he said to her, have this Jupiter guy go on June 19th, old calendar, to talk to the ex-boyfriend. On June 19th, the moon was in Capricorn and it was trining Venus.
Yeah.
Okay. And this just to show the dignities. If we look at Capricorn here, the moon is a triplicity ruler of Capricorn, and about 20 degrees where it trines Venus, it's in the term of Venus also. So there's definitely a reception going on.
Yes.
The outcome. My counsel was followed, and the issue was thus: by the gentleman's means and procurement, the matter was brought on again. The gentleman means Jupiter. The match effected, and all within 20 days, to the content of the sorrowful, but as to me, unthankful lady. So she didn't even thank him. She got them back together, and she dumped Lilly here. But elsewhere, Lilly writes, this was interesting, the position of Saturn or Mars in the 10th in a Horary figure, and they peregrine, so without dignity, essential dignity, or unfortunate, afflicted in some way, or the South Node in the 10th, then the artist, the astrologer, hardly gets any credit.
All right.
So here we look, in this chart, there's both Saturn and Mars in the 10th. The South Node isn't there. And they're not in positions of dignity. And they're actually afflicting each other because they're both malefic.
Mm-hmm.
So Lilly would expect that she would not be thankful. That, he would hardly get any credit for the work he did. She was ungrateful and gave him little credit.
If moon was exactly trining Venus, then the sun would have been quite close to Jupiter as well, because Jupiter here represents the friend, but also it can be the spouse. If we look at it from a more Vedic perspective, it could be the spouse, and it's also the fact that he's exalted. It means he's also very much wanted by her.
I think Lilly said June 19th, which would have been 3 days after the question. And so the sun would have moved 3 degrees, and
yeah,
it would
so
be
that
at
would be
8. It would be 8 of Cancer. Oh, I made a note here, I didn't comment. The moon, when it trines Venus, is doing it from the 5th house, which in traditional horror is a house of your emissaries, people you send on your behalf to do business for you.
Mm-hmm.
And so it does have that, and she sent this man to advocate for her. And the moon is the dispositor of this Jupiter guy. And the moon is it's a dispositor and the exaltation ruler of Jupiter. So the moon has a close connection to Jupiter. She was ungrateful. Mars or Saturn in the 10th, peregrine or unfortunate of the South Node there. The artist hardly gets credit by that question. So Lilly's he summarizes the chart. The true reason of this performance is no more than, first, an application of the 2 significators to sextile. That is, the Lord of the 7th and 1st coming to sextile. Sun rules the 1st, Saturn rules the 7th. Sun is coming to sextile Saturn. Next, so you say, why did this work out? The application of the moon to the Lord of the ascendant. The moon is applying to the sun. Though by opposition, yet with reception.
Yes.
Reception,
because the moon rules the sun.
Receives the sun in Cancer, was a small argument, but the sun isn't receiving the moon. But the main occasion without which the figure could not have been is that the application of Jupiter to the sextile of Saturn, but this is false. So it's interesting that Lilly says the main reason this worked is that Jupiter was applying to Saturn, but in reality, Jupiter separating from Saturn. So it gives us something to think about. The two meeting with no prohibition, frustration, etc., until this perfect until Jupiter conjoined with the Sun, okay, on the 20th. So no difficulty after. So in other words, Lilly's saying that Jupiter sextile Saturn is what really brought them together, but in fact Jupiter's separating, not applying.
Yeah, I was thinking if we would consider the Sun, the querent, applying to Jupiter, the husband, in this case, there would also be a combustion.
Right.
Right. So I would definitely look at some other significator, but I mean, basically we have to look at the querent and then the seventh house, which is the Sun and Saturn, and the Sun is going to sextile Saturn soon. So we would say that gives us, that's a strong first, initial argument in this analysis. And then it would be the transit of the Moon and the trine to Venus, and so applying to Venus. Mm-hmm.
Now here I speculated, this isn't Lilly. Jupiter, because Jupiter is separating from Saturn, it may be that the positive outcome is reflected by the Moon's transits. Because first the Moon opposes the Sun, which is the querent, and then it trines Saturn. So it's moving from its opposition to the Sun to a trine to Saturn. And the Moon could be the querent. And Saturn in Taurus is in the exaltation of the Moon. And the Moon would be in Capricorn, which is the domicile of Saturn, so that there's a very strong mutual reception there.
Yeah.
The Moon is receiving Saturn by exaltation, and Saturn is receiving the Moon by domicile.
Yeah, so it's always important when an aspect occurs that there is some kind of reception involved.
And this
as
this is a powerful reception because it's exaltation to domicile, and so the Moon is forming a very strong trine to Saturn. And if the Moon is the querent and Saturn is the boyfriend, that really does bring them together.
Right. So if Moon would oppose Jupiter, then Moon would do that from Capricorn, which is the debilitation sign of Jupiter. So that would not be considered a good, because an opposition can be, solidifying something, or it can be some kind of agreement, but that would not.
And an opposition without reception,
consensus,
or in this case, kind of negative reception. It's an opposition from the fall of Jupiter. It's really, Jupiter wants nothing to do with the Moon in that case. The end.
Yeah, so I wonder what happened with them. If she was a borderline case, maybe the next week, the guy came to the astrologer.
It sounds like she was a very moody, impulsive person. It's hard to imagine this marriage working out well. We don't know how it worked out.
Right. Yeah. I guess he wouldn't bother after such ungratefulness. Okay. Thank you, Anthony, for presenting this interesting example.
I thought it was interesting. It gives us a lot to think about, both the horary and then how it is that Lilly gave good advice based on inaccurate information.
Yes. I think we always have to look for confluence. Even in this horoscope, it was quite clear there was enough positive to actually go with a positive answer. Because I think when people ask you things, you subconsciously, you want to help them, and you have to be objective. At the same time, when you see, 3 positive things, maybe 2 negative things, we tend to go positive. Or when you see 3 negative things, 2 positive things, it's not always easy to make that distinction, I find. And then most of the time it plays out negatively. So I think when it really points to one direction, well, it's clear and it's easy. There's not much to doubt about,
Yeah, well, I think another interesting thing about the case we just did is that the question wasn't, will I get together with him? It was, what can I do to get together with him? So he used the horary chart as kind of an elective chart. What behaviors should I take and when to get a good outcome?
Yeah, so it was more subtle, yeah, more
Yeah.
nuanced than a simple yes or no. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So thank you very much, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye.
Okay.